I don't know what to do with a world where the definition of fact has changed.
It's a post-truth world, and it's really scary.
For anybody who's been following the news, Minneapolis, we have been targeted in ways that I haven't imagined I would see in America in my lifetime.
Cancel the next guest. We're going to be here for a while.
We want to go down this rabbit hole.
Hennepin County, they put such emphasis on prevention. When somebody gets an eviction notice, there's a number to call. There's lawyers available to help them stay in their apartment. And that's brilliant.
But it's not brilliant. It's just common sense. When did common sense become brilliant? I mean, I guess maybe since we no longer have the level of common sense that we used to have.
There seems to be more opposition to housing as a solution.
You know, there's no emerging body of evidence that counteracts what it is we've been proving for decades. We live in a society that wants to separate those who've earned their way, those who are worthy, and those who have themselves to blame. There's no such thing as compassion fatigue if we use community to nurture our compassion.
There's so many directions I want to go into. If you're new to the Homeless Unfiltered podcast, we have a treat for you. And if you're a regular listener, watcher, thank you. You're gonna love this episode. I'm joined by Jennifer Ho. Jennifer is the Commissioner of Minnesota Housing. When we were doing the Hennepin County documentary, which I will link to below, she was highly recommended that we needed to talk to her, but schedules we couldn't make it happen. This is the first time I have met Jennifer in person, and there's people you just click with, and that was Jennifer. This conversation is so amazing because we talk about homelessness, we talk about healthcare, we talk about housing, and at times the conversation got very philosophical, and it challenged me, and I know it's going to challenge you. Jennifer worked at the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness under my hero, Barbara Poppy. She worked at HUD, Housing and Urban Development. She worked in healthcare. She is amazing, and you are going to love this podcast. Please watch, listen, and share. I'm grateful that you were able to take some time for us this morning.
No, it's great to finally meet you.
Can you just give us, you have a pretty extensive career in not just government, but homeless services.
I actually started my career in healthcare, managed care. I was a managed care executive at United Healthcare.
Oh, wow.
But before that, I had been at Blue Cross Blue Shield. I was running their Medicare and Medicaid programs. And one day I got invited to a meeting. Right? Every great story begins with a meeting.
Yeah.
And it was early days of the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And they were trying to engage the healthcare system and the government parts of healthcare finance in the conversation about the fact that we probably had members who were homeless. And they probably were the people who were the most likely to use the emergency room a lot and have extended hospitalizations. And all the managed care tools that I had in my little suburban office were designed for people like me. And I was very intrigued as somebody who was always trying to contain costs and to look at patterns of utilization around this kind of proposition that some nonprofit wanted to house my highest cost members, and the idea that there would therefore be better health outcomes and, for me, lower costs.
Right.
And so my entry into this was financially motivated, and it was like nonprofits saying, we're going to come in and help solve your hard to solve problem with the tools you have. And I said, let's go.
And the lower cost actually is for the taxpayer when you're looking at the homeless population.
Yeah, well, as a managed care company, it was for the managed care company.
Right.
But yeah, the dollars that were flowing into us from the state and the feds were taxpayer dollars.
So after healthcare, then?
The conversation that I that evolved out of that meeting in 1996 became a pilot with a nonprofit startup, and they recruited me to be their executive director. I had just gone to United Healthcare, and I said, I just have to go see how this side of the world works a little bit. And then they couldn't find somebody. They did a second search. I was on the search committee. We couldn't find somebody. And at that point in time, I had gotten a sense of what for-profit healthcare was like, and I raised my hand and I said I was ready.
Yeah.
And so I started as the executive director of a startup nonprofit to take this idea that we were going to prove in Minnesota what had been already documented on both coasts. But, we weren't going to believe that the cost of care and the cost of intervention from San Francisco and New York City were going to be the same in Minnesota.
Right.
So we basically replicated that type of work. Let's house people with the longest histories of homelessness. Let's invest in a quantitative and qualitative study of healthcare expenditure and human outcomes, and diagram, what it is that we did to get there. And lo and behold, it turns out.
Yeah. And then you went to USICH?
Yeah, I had gotten involved. I was at the nonprofit for over 10 years, and I had gotten involved in national policy discussions. I was going to the national conferences. I was sitting on some national boards, and I had developed really a pretty deep friendship with Barbara Poppy in Columbus, Ohio, because in Columbus, she was running something that was an intermediary. In Minnesota, I was running something that was an intermediary. And whenever I went to conference, I always said, Barb, can I have coffee with you for a half hour? Because it will help me understand what I need to be doing 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And then when she got named to be the head of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness under Obama, she actually texted me. And I remember that because that was kind of like at the very beginning of my text life.
Yeah.
And I was like, why does my phone do this? And she said, will you come out to D.C. and be my deputy?
Awesome.
I had never worked in government. I'd worked with government, but I
Yeah.
had never worked in government. And it was, President Obama was my first president, and I was just like, yeah.
Well, I adore Barb. She's a big supporter of what we do at Invisible People, and she's a massive supporter of me, right? She's always texting me, encouraging me. And how we first met was interesting because I'm not a policy person. My eyes water when you all start talking policy. So I
Beware for this conversation then.
Right, no, I no. This is a good story because I was so nervous about interviewing Barb, and I didn't set out. I was just walking through the hall of this conference, National Alliance Conference, many, many years ago. Someone from HUD said, you've got to interview Barb Poppy. And she was walking through the hall. I had my camera right there. And we did. And I was so nervous. It's on the YouTube channel. It's older. And we became friends from that.
That's who she is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who she is.
Yeah.
There's one thing to have coffee with somebody at a conference twice a year. It's another to suddenly, work with her, trying to navigate all of the federal government and create a comprehensive federal plan and all that stuff, and to do it while doing what she values so deeply, which is to get into community, talk to people, the frontline staff who are doing the work and the people that they are trying to help, and figure out how to integrate all that with the federal government, in a way that is really kind of, authentic. So
and
just do that.
And I believe at the time it was, it was USICH, but Barbara and all of your work. In Obama, it was the Opening Doors Plan.
Yeah, I helped shepherd that. I spent weekends at the dining room table of the place I was staying, trying to take all of this information and feedback and put it together in a way that was digestible to people who weren't so deeply in the policy space, something that was going to be distributed to communities across the country, but also serve as an accountability roadmap for the federal government itself on how to do this work.
If I remember, it was pretty cutting edge.
I think what had happened previously was that Philip Mangano in that role had said, we're going to have every community do a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. that permanent supportive housing was the way to do that. You know, a big champion for housing first. And then this idea of getting every local community, every governor to adopt that goal. But I think what Philip did was kind of focus out. And what we did in federal service was focus in. What do we need to do as the federal government in order to support local communities to advance this work? And then we also broadened the scope beyond individuals experiencing chronic homelessness to families with children, youth, and then the special carve-out for veterans that's been so successful.
Homelessness, and you've been able to see it, for better or worse, from the 30,000-foot level. And homelessness was a lot different back then than it is today.
I mean, yes and no.
Yeah?
I
Explain
mean,
that.
you've experienced it. I haven't.
Right.
You know, mine is a second level of observation always. What's changed is how deadly and how inexpensive are the array of drugs that are out there. A lot of the communities where we built supportive housing early on, the cost to build has gotten so expensive. In my mind's eye, it's still largely an economic problem
Right.
of people not being able to afford housing. It's just that housing's gotten so much more expensive that building permanent supportive housing may be exponentially so in terms of the
Right.
cost per unit. But there's nothing I've seen that says that if you actually invest in an intensive engagement model that meets people where they're at,
Right.
it gets them to agree to try a home that they control and give them the right supports, that people don't
Right.
thrive and succeed in that. It's just that we've never figured out how to have a relationship-based engagement model with a clean handoff into a supportive housing intervention that's financed in a way that's adequate, reliable, and sustainable for the organizations that are willing to do that.
And to be able to scale it across the country.
Yeah. And we have so many successful pilots.
Right. Exactly.
As homelessness grows, people are getting frustrated and they're pushing for laws that criminalize homelessness, which will only make the problem worse. Invisible People reaches more people, educating them on homelessness than all other homeless sector nonprofits and campaigns combined. But we do it on a limited budget. We don't have the funding they do. We are mostly funded by individual donations. And now that the economy is struggling, individual donations are disappearing, and we need you. I get it. You might not have the money to donate. Many people are struggling right now. Please share our content, share our videos. It really matters. And if you do have some funds and want to help be part of the solution to solve homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our important work stops without you.
What has changed in homelessness is, as you stated, I mean, I'd never even heard of xylazine 10 years ago. And xylazine, for those watching or listening, is basically a horse tranquilizer. And, we interviewed a anthropologist from Columbia that studies drug supply. And he was talking, we criminalized opiates. I'm not arguing should they be illegal or legal. I'm just saying the result of that was fentanyl. And now that there's this big push to criminalize fentanyl, which I'm not saying it should be illegal or illegal, the result of that is xylazine, is people are going to do drugs. And xylazine, oh my gosh, I've never seen such wounds. I mean, it's so addicting. But the other is affordable housing, because if you look at the 10-year plans back then, that I'm aware of, and I'm not a big policy person, we really didn't foresee how the affordable housing crisis was going to skyrocket homeless numbers.
Yeah, I think what's really extraordinary is the fact that the numbers aren't higher than they are.
Ooh.
Because when I was doing this work inside of the federal government and kind of opening doors around the country to talk about it, I had a lot of people who came up to me and said that homelessness was going to be 10 times worse
Wow.
in the coming years because of everything that was happening. And so I think it's an extraordinary tribute to the work that we do, but also to just human resilience.
Yeah.
That folks have figured out how to scrape by as things have gotten harder and harder, less and less affordable, things that we would never have imagined for our lifetimes. So I think it's extraordinary that we have been able to do what we do, and that we have things like veterans homelessness as a proof point.
Yes.
That even in this economy, even in this housing market, even with this drug array, federally approved drugs, by the way,
Yeah.
right? Just some very creative off-label use and incredibly low price point. The price of a high is so much less than it used to be, so you can just do it over and over and over and over again. But despite all of that, the numbers, like, they grow and decline, like, on an increment, because some would have forecasted like a homelessness Armageddon. And I know that depending on the community that you live in and the neighborhood that you live in and the street that you live on, all those things, it could have gotten much worse where you are. And in some communities where people living outside has become the majority of the way that we see it, or, in my home community, the Twin Cities, we've had periods of massive encampments and housed people therefore see homelessness differently than they had seen it before. But at least, by the numbers, given the external forces, I think it's testament to the fact that we actually know what to do. We just, as you said, have not committed to scaling it.
Well, we know how to solve homelessness. We just lack the political and public will to do it at the scale that needs to happen. There's so many directions I want to go into. You're talking about homelessness Armageddon. I often say we have a perfect storm of homelessness coming because of how artificial intelligence is going to kill a lot of jobs. I mean, truckers, there's 4 million truckers in this country, and trucks are already driving themselves. And that's
Terrifies me.
Yeah.
That terrifies me.
But what you said just gave me hope, because if you're looking at homelessness across the country, that it should have been worse, but people are resilient and will figure it out.
Yeah.
However, we still haven't figured out to scale permanent supportive housing where it needs to be. And I just want to give props to Hennepin County, because it really opened my eyes. And I will link to the documentary below. It's the first time, I've heard the talk of prevention, but we went in and prevention became part of the model. People say, well, it's shelter, or people say it's permanent supportive housing, or it's prevention, or it's all these things. What Hennepin County taught me, it's a community-wide system. It's not one little piece. It's all of it working together. And it'll never be perfect. But what I so love about Hennepin County is that they put such emphasis on prevention. In fact, when somebody gets an eviction notice, there's a number to call the county where there's lawyers available to help them stay in their apartment. And that's brilliant. I think a big piece of where we're going because of increase in cost of housing has to be prevention, especially with job loss, AI, and different things.
But it's not brilliant. It's just common sense.
I knew where you were going.
When did common sense become brilliant? I mean, I guess.
Right.
I guess maybe since we no longer have the level of common sense that we used to have, when we see it, it appears as brilliance.
Yeah.
Because we don't have as much sense as we used to about these things. But I mean, think about any other place that we interact. I mean, you buy a tube of toothpaste and it gives you an 800 number. I know how to use toothpaste.
Yeah.
But there's an 800 number on the tube, I mean, so the fact that there's a call for help number on an evictions notice when we're about ready to throw a family into the worst crisis of their life doesn't seem brilliant. I think the thing that makes it brilliant is that we have these fragmented systems, and when somebody is in crisis, we throw them into the abyss of that fragmentation. And then we blame them for flailing, when every system that was designed to do some part of community building, isn't talking to each other.
Right.
And then when they talk to each other and they figure out how to make it work just a little bit better here for people, like bright light. Oh my goodness.
Right.
You know? But like just
You're
imagine.
spot on.
Yeah, just imagine if we could just like design it from scratch where the premise was, let's just help people.
So I want to say, how do we fix it? But I don't think that's the right phrasing. We've been mostly reactionary from my perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that brilliance, that common sense doesn't show up because, and I get it, instead of seeing the train wreck that's coming, we're focused on the car wreck that's in front of us, right? Which forces us to be reactionary so we don't take a breath to go, oh, this is common sense. Let's just fix it.
We live in a society that wants to be able to other and separate, you know, those who've earned their way, those who are worthy,
Yeah.
and those who have themselves to blame. And so it is very easy for taxpayers to not hold the systems that they finance accountable for achieving outcomes across the board, and that you're always going to have like how people perform in a system be on some kind of bell curve or something. Like the most exciting work happens when we start at the hardest end and like solve for that. I always said, you know, if we designed a healthcare system around a 56-year-old guy who'd lived on the street for 10 years, who wasn't a veteran, who didn't have that benefit package, if we designed the healthcare system around him, it would work so well for me. But we designed the healthcare system around me, and it doesn't work well for me. It certainly doesn't work well for him. So, like, you know?
The healthcare piece. So one of the things, and I could be wrong, it's not my expertise. I've always said, you know, like I go to the emergency room. And of course, insurance is important, right? Because they've got to bill for services. But whatever my issue is, it gets taken care of. In homeless services, when a person comes to a shelter or a case manager or whatever, it's more that I've seen because funders put in all these requirements. For instance, I worked for a shelter and there was a contract that, you know, I'm making up the numbers here. It's pretty close. Like, okay, you can house 3 veterans, 4 people with mental illness, right? And the contract is dictating who we can help, not actually who needs the help. I'll be candid. So at the time, this particular nonprofit, we had no veterans. So they actually put an ad in the paper, are you a homeless veteran? True story. So I've always felt that, I'm not saying the healthcare model is perfect, but oh my gosh, I turned 65.
I'm right behind you.
I'm going into Medicare, and
be grateful for that.
I am grateful for that, but there's a bunch of medications that Medicare doesn't cover that I need, and I'm like trying to figure it out. So anyways, that's a whole different rabbit trail. We won't get in there. But wouldn't it be better if we kind of took some of the healthcare model of how somebody goes to an emergency room and gets help, instead of, you know, how we're currently trying to triage somebody's crisis that is on the streets?
I mean, it's just a scarcity versus entitlement conversation. I mean, even though it isn't executed at all perfectly here, the theory is that, you know, the vast majority of people do have access to that health insurance. Hospitals are required to care for people regardless of insurance status. That at least gets you in the door. And then there's somebody who tries to help you get to Medicaid if you walk in the door and you don't have any insurance. There's a whole federal mechanism for funding uncompensated care. There, make you cry with policy. But the idea with the way that we fund...
Oh, that bit I understood.
the way that we fund homeless services, we've never said everybody who needs it will take care of them when they walk in the door, and then we just have to attach them to a
Right.
funding stream that's going to follow them into the care system and the housing system for what they need. I mean, we know that we fund housing vouchers at a 1 to 4, 1 to 5 of who needs it. Like, there is nothing in the way we finance homelessness that says the financing mechanism will scale to the level of need and the intensity of need that any individual presents with. Because when it first manifested in a big way, they thought it was a temporary problem. It was largely funded charitably. And then it just kind of became this, federal programs that were just funded at certain levels,
Right.
regardless of need. The only place where we're funding a response to homelessness that is completely commensurate to its manifestation is with veterans. And it's not because they turned it into an entitlement benefit like Medicare. It's just that it's been so popular with the Congress that year over year increases in appropriations for things like the HUD-VA supportive housing program or supportive services for veterans' families, they've just grown to the level that it can hold the number of veterans
Yeah.
experiencing homelessness in this country. And so the real work is about making sure that these federal resources are deployed in such a way that they're actually designed to help the folks that are out there. But that should be proof.
Right.
Like when we fund, I've been talking, we used to talk a lot about evidence-based practices, best practices. And it was always about best practices in care, right? Supportive housing as a best practice. But we've never talked about the best practice of how we pay for it.
Ouch.
And so I have been talking a lot, thinking a lot about like what is a best practice in how we finance street outreach, how we finance shelter, how we finance permanent supportive housing. Like that is not a part of the federal conversation, the state policy conversation, here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference conversation. But like we know what to do, and we actually know that there are better ways to pay for it and less good ways, less reliable ways to pay for it. So let's start talking about best practices in financing. And I know it's super, super wonky. I am a super, super wonky person. But like, it doesn't matter if we know what works if we don't pay for it in a way that's sustainable.
Right. Right. How do we do that? How do we?
I mean, HUD-VASH is a great example of that. Like, a voucher is imperfect, but a voucher, by and large, with a lot of it, aggressive work with landlords to get it to be of use. Like a voucher works,
Right.
right? A voucher is like gets to housing stability. With every voucher that's funded by Congress through HUD, through the public housing authorities, it says 1 in 20 vouchers will do a case manager over at the VA. So you end up with this ratio of people served to helpers that seems to make sense. And it's not like we're going to give the VA X dollars per voucher. We're going to fund a position. And that position is actually going to be like a clinically trained, clinically supported caregiver. So it's going to be somebody who has the skills or has the supervision and supports around them so that if they're encountering somebody with a fentanyl addiction, if they're encountering somebody with combat trauma, if they're encountering somebody who's got depression and anxiety, they have somebody who has a level of education, support, and
Right.
To be able to do that. But then take a look at what we do outside of the veteran space. That exact same human being who doesn't have military service may or may not have Medicaid, may or may not be in a state where the Medicaid benefit was designed to help house somebody who is homeless, right? May or may not get access to a project-based unit or a voucher or a HUD continuum of care funded unit. Like it's just all kind of maybe, maybe not, right? And so what do we end up with? We end up with this unpredictable place where if you live in a place that has that benefit, you get the right provider, you get hooked up with a unit that makes sense for you, bingo, like we can solve your homelessness. But you could be that exact same person in another state, in another community, in another health system, and like you don't get it.
You helped answer something for me when you said funding for veterans, homeless veterans, is easier. I don't know if easier is the right word, but Congress is more supportive because it's veterans, right? And I've never connected those dots of why the funding for veterans just seems to be there. Where I was going, and I've been wanting to ask, because one thing that's also changed, I mean, and you were working with Barbara, Obama administration and everything, and we're going towards more permanent supportive housing. We're moving in that direction, and now it seems to be going the other way, right? There seems to be more opposition to housing as a solution.
There's no emerging body of evidence that counteracts what it is we've been proving for decades. I mean, when I started working for the nonprofit, that was 1999, and we were building off of evidence that had come out of the Bay Area and New York in the early 90s. And I mean, and those are high cost healthcare markets too. I mean, so it wasn't like the early evidence came from places that were anomalies. In fact, they probably were some of the hardest places. So I think what we have right now is a shift away from evidence towards ideology.
Right.
And we're seeing that in other spaces and places today too. But it doesn't refute the evidence.
Right.
And so I think that as communities question, like, should they pivot? You've got one body of evidence that says if you consistently do this thing, supportive housing, and you try to figure out how to get your systems aligned to do it at scale, you will experience a reduction in street homelessness.
Which is all people want.
But now people are saying, we'll do this thing instead.
Yeah.
And so if I was a community leader, I would say, well, wait a minute. This thing works, and it helps eliminate the thing that is politically hard, that communities don't like, businesses don't like.
Right.
I mean, nobody with a kid wants to try to explain to their kid why that guy is sleeping on the sidewalk, right? This is something that's universally not liked,
Right.
right? By the people experiencing it, by the liberals, by the conservatives. Like, nobody wants more homelessness in their community.
Right.
And so now, like, some folks are telling us, stop doing the thing that works. I take high blood pressure medicine. I think that's a byproduct of my federal service, or maybe just my age. But I mean, I don't like taking those pills every morning. But I take those pills every morning, and it turns out my blood pressure is clicking along here at like a healthy range. And so, like, if somebody suddenly says to me, hey, I don't like blood pressure medicine, you should stop taking it, guess what? I'm going to keep taking it because it's keeping me healthy and alive.
And it is. It's an ignorance of the evidence, and it's an intentional ignorance. I think people see the truth, but as you said, it's ideology or whatever, politics, and we're moving away. Hopefully, the pendulum will shift back the other way.
I mean, you have to remember, like, the pitch for permanent supportive housing from the very beginning was never easy.
Right.
Because it really came into a culture that said, like, you must be, on mental health medication and stable. You must be clean and sober. You must be
Housing
all
ready.
These things. Yeah. I mean, and like, purpose-built supportive housing works against a whole ideology
Well,
of
explain that. I've never heard that term before.
when the behavioral health and mental health system was getting people out of institutions and into the community, there was housing as housing, I think was maybe, God, I'm so old I don't remember the jargon anymore. But the idea was that not only did you need to have a home not in an institution in the community, but you needed to have a home that was so integrated that your neighbors weren't also people with disabilities, which is great. People should have that choice 100%. But when we do purpose-built supportive housing, let's say a 40, 60, 80 unit building, but people have the ability to control their own unit, come and go as they please, interact with the neighbors in their building, but also the people down the street and in the coffee shop and in the grocery store and in the park. Like that is integrated in the community as well. But in the early days of supportive housing, some of the folks who were as clear about everybody should have an integrated unit in the community is kind of as pure as I was when I felt like we should just focus on housing and not focus on shelter. Yeah. Like I got a lot smarter over time. It's like if the shelter system isn't working, then the feeder system in the housing doesn't work either. We need to invest in both. And so I'm just saying, like, the uphill battle over time, decades, to help win the hearts and minds of communities around the efficacy of supportive housing, even with a barrel of evidence, right? Because it was what people like deeply believed was the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it, or the reason why you became homeless in the first place. And all these things, like we're so programmed to have what we believe, like just not be able to deal with. Now I got Jack Nicholson in my mind. You can't handle the truth, but I mean, in many ways, like as communities, like we so want to believe what we've been taught. Right. That makes sense in a lot of ways in a certain context. But when we try to bring homelessness into that context, right. they're at odds. Right. And then now we operate in a world where up is down and down is up, and where we get our facts from different places. Right. Like, I don't know what to do with a world where the definition of fact has changed.
It's a post-truth world, and it's really scary.
The world has not always been truthful.
No, it isn't, and truth is relative, right? You have a truth, I have a truth, and then there's reality, right? It's just something gets shared online, and now you have to go look at the source. What I tell nonprofits is protect your story, because one of the most valuable commodities is going to be your reputation, right? Because you could build 30 years of a reputation and destroy it in 30 seconds. And that trust, if people don't trust the source. Now, some people ignore the source. They just want to believe it anyways. But as we go into this post-truth world, I think very strongly that we have to stand up for integrity, which as nonprofits, like, skip the gimmicks, be authentic. If you've followed me for years, you had USICH saying, we ended veterans homelessness in 100 communities. And you have Community Solutions saying we've ended veterans homelessness in 14 communities. Those are different things. And I get it. It's different criteria and everything else.
I sat in those conversations.
Right.
And how big is zero?
Right. And then you look at the public, and the public's saying, well, 100's bigger than 14. We're not going to. So all I'm saying is we're in this post-truth world. We have to be very conscious of the facts that we're trying, or the truth we're trying to communicate.
Well, first of all, danger zone for you, Mark. I was a philosophy major in college. My senior thesis was on objectivity and subjectivity, and questioning, whether either one was actually possible. Yeah. And I mean, you don't let's speak to your audience. I don't know that they want to go down this rabbit hole with us. Well, we want to go down this rabbit hole.
I'm saying cancel the next guest. We're going to be here for a while.
I think the most important thing is I have come to view, like, learning how to house people with long histories of homelessness or do homelessness prevention well, that for a lot of folks, me included, there's a metaphor to religion. That you come in kind of jaded, unsure, cynical, and then it's by a series of events where you just have to see with your own eyes and confront, like, the fact that everything that you thought was true before led you astray, and everything that you are now seeing, like, puts you on a different path. And so for the folks that are doing this work every day, trust your story, right? I mean, I had orchestrated a massive, you know, 3-tiered research project in order to prove from a data perspective that what we were doing made sense. But Jennifer Ho came to understand what made sense because I kept talking to individuals whose life stories were extraordinary, with some thing that happened that put them on a downhill slide. And then every single person I've ever met who went from resigned to being homeless for the rest of their lives and dying on the street involves the first name of some caseworker where they finally made that connection. Everybody has a Julie, everybody has a Bob, everybody has a, a Richard, everybody has, and then I met, right? When you hear that story over and over and over again, like that's what changes what we were taught to think coming in with what we fundamentally believe. And then that belief becomes backed by this enormous body of evidence that says, and by the way, it's a much better investment of scarce public resource.
It's what we're trying to do in Visible People is make the truth louder, be repetitious, do it not just in narrative, but also visual. People attach to it or connect to it. For example, we try to focus on stories where it's a before and after, where you have somebody in a tent and we follow them into their apartment, right? People connect to that personal story. They visually see tent, home. I now can believe, or I have evidence, emotional evidence, because the factual evidence is there, right? That, housing is the permanent solution to homeless encampments because that's all they want. Is homelessness gone. I could talk to you forever. In fact, I want to talk to you forever, but we're running out of time.
Forever is a mighty long time.
Yeah, right. And we didn't get to your time at HUD, so we'll just skip right over that. And how about we end, tell us what's going on in Minnesota and leave us with some hope, something that, we're going to see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will.
Well, for anybody who's been following the news, we are also looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. We have been targeted in ways that I haven't imagined I would see in America in my lifetime. But I think as I have talked to people and reflected on this moment, the thing that's most amazing to me is that, like, my fellow Minnesotans organized in such an extraordinarily quick way to figure out how to just protect their neighbors. And the thousands of whistles, the signal chats, the patrols, the block by block by block by block, like all of that. I mean, yes, the legal system. Thank you, legal system. We all understand habeas corpus maybe better than we did a month ago. And all of that. We had a city that was at war with its police department when George Floyd was murdered. And now the Minneapolis Police Department is protecting the citizens of Minnesota who are out there protecting their neighbors. And that is not specifically about homelessness, but it's about, like, what is fundamentally within us and how, when it would be easy to just put your head under the pillow, like, people ran towards danger with a whistle in their mouth, calling attention to themselves when there are people with weapons drawn in our street. Now, if we can mobilize in that way, in this time, around this, what would it take to just leverage that level of coordination, compassion, urgency around this other piece? And so, like, I come out of this moment with a deeper belief in my neighbors, my community, and even, I've got friends who live in, second, third tier suburbs who say they just like their neighbors are showing up for community meetings and they're wanting to go into other communities and do school patrols and all these other things in a way that like they just never would have thought that their neighbor had that in them. And so I think there's something about the level of response to being told that everything that we've come to believe that is good, that we should do something else instead, that's actually an inspiring response. Because I think, as I was saying before, like when you actually tap at what people fundamentally believe is right, and then you tell them that it's wrong, like it turns out that folks say, no, And so I'm really proud of what I have witnessed, and that has helped me believe that there's no such thing as compassion fatigue if we use community to nurture our compassion.
Oh my gosh. There's the title of the podcast. I was going to do the Jack Nicholson line, but I think that's better.
Well, we'd have to get, permission and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for your work, Mark. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah. I'm glad we really got a chance to finally sit face to face.
Yep.